In 1908, Model T took the United States by storm. By 1927, 15 million of them had hit the roads, quickly forcing the horse and buggy into retirement. As cars became more popular, roads were paved, open lots were zoned for parking, and people started moving out of the city into the suburbs. The city adapted around this new mode of transportation. Now, in 2021, our Teslas are effectively driving themselves. In 50 years, when all our cars are driving us, how different will our cities look? Hello, my name is Tanner Carolyn, and I'm a senior here at UW-Madison studying civil engineering. Today I'll be talking to you about the way I believe the self-driving car industry is headed with privately owned and used vehicles. I will then compare it with the ways that we could push the industry with an emphasis on public transportation. This way, we could find an alternative that benefits both consumers and cities. It's no secret that the autonomous vehicle industry is the next big step for cars. But before the cars are released to the general public, it is extremely important that we start a conversation on how we want these vehicles to shape our cities. We have the power now to dictate the integration of self-driving cars into our society to ensure the utmost safety while minimizing negative side effects for our city. As I see it, there are three possible scenarios in the way we push the autonomous vehicle industry. The first, personally owned and operated cars. You own it, you pay for it, you're in charge of it, the way we've always done it. The second, publicly owned and operated vehicles. The city buys it with taxpayer money, they let you use it, they maintain it. The third, privately owned and publicly used vehicles. An outside company owns it, lets you use it, and is paid to operate in your city. For each criteria, I will assign a score to each alternative from 1 to 3 points, with 3 being the best and 1 being the worst. These scores will then be multiplied by the weight of the criteria and added to give a final score. I am conducting this analysis with the city's interests in mind. Therefore, I have weighted cost to the city as the highest with a weight of 3. Environmental impact is in second with 2 times multiplier, and effect on cityscape with 1. How will self-driving cars change the cities in which we live? While it may not seem as important as it is still imperative that our cities look nice and function efficiently. There are some changes that I predict autonomous vehicles will eventually make, no matter what the local infrastructure. At some point in a fully autonomous future, we will likely get rid of the clunky, obstructive streetlights, as all cars will be able to communicate their next moves without them. Streets will eventually shrink in width, as vehicles can stay closer together without fear of bumping one another. Our streets will look nicer and take up less of our precious city space. In a future where these vehicles are privately owned, the changes may stop there. Hopefully when the human driver is out of the equation, traffic will lighten and create a quicker drive to work. However, cars will need to be parked while the owners are working. According to a UK report put out last year by the Royal Automobile Club Foundation, the typical car is parked 96.5% of its lifetime. In a publicly operated future, a fleet of unmanned vehicles will roam the city picking people up. In this method, there will be less need for centralized parking, so more space can be devoted to residential and commercial space. Harvard University researchers note that as much as 1/3 of the land in some cities is devoted to parking space. In Seattle, which is in dire need of new affordable housing, 40% of the land area is currently used for parking. Creating a parking district in the outside of a city will allow for that third to become extra business and homes, creating more prosperous community. I would consider the allocation of less space to parking a good thing for most large cities. Therefore, in this category, I will rank both publicly operated methods over that of private ownership. I would say that the structure in which the city or another company owns the cars will definitely rank above that in which everyone owns their own. The Environmental Defense Fund estimates that transportation causes nearly 27% of all greenhouse emissions. In an industry like transportation that is so heavily linked with the climate crisis, it is important that we reduce our impact as much as we possibly can. Hopefully the come up of the self-driving car industry will be accented with that of the new electric vehicle tech as to minimize our footprint. One thing the industry should do is reduce the time spent searching for a parking spot. the vehicle will be able to drop off passengers and have a predetermined spot to move to. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration states that 30% of driving in business districts is spent on the hunt for a parking spot. The agency estimates that almost 1 billion miles of driving is wasted in this way every year. Hopefully, a reduction in the time driving coincides with a reduction in emissions. However, one of the major concerns of implementation of self-driving cars is the possibility that people will move further outside of the city, into the suburbs and rural areas, as they no longer have to focus on driving during their commute. When the average commute time for a population increases so drastically, emissions will significantly worsen. Hopefully, with a more centralized transportation network that comes with public transportation, more people will be encouraged to live closer to the city and reduce their commutes. This also gets a lot easier when there is less parking area and more residential buildings. I would consider both alternatives of public transportation to once again be ranked above private ownership in this case. As I am conducting this analysis with the interests of the city in mind, I have weighted the cost to the city very highly. This is taxpayer money that will be coming out of the city funds that will likely go to programs that are just as important as transportation. According to a report of Chicago's operating budget, parking tickets brought in nearly $264 million last year. As the cityscapes change and parking tickets are a thing of the past, the city will likely lose that revenue. This is inevitable in all three alternatives. A publicly subsidized and accessible vehicle fleet will be associated with a very large fee for the city. There will be large upfront costs, constant maintenance fees, and pricey insurance policies. For this alternative to be successful, the operation will have to be much larger than that of current public transportation systems. This alternative will be rated the worst for cost to the city. Continuing to encourage the purchasing and daily operation of private vehicles will incur no initial cost to the city. However, as I said before, it is likely that the current residents will have more incentive to move out of the city. Therefore, I believe there are some pretty important long-term costs associated with this alternative. A privately funded and publicly accessible fleet of vehicles will cost the city little to no money. The city may choose to pay the private companies like Uber and Lyft to operate within city limits, but I believe this cost will be significantly less than any other alternative. Therefore, I have ranked this as the best in this criteria. I have taken the results from each criteria and placed them on a single table. Final scores are tallied below. The privately owned and operated alternative will make no improvements to the cityscape. It will be the worst method from an environmental standpoint. It will cost the city in the long term. Therefore, it would not be the best method. This alternative scored 9 points. An alternative in which the city provides a fleet of vehicles will have a positive impact on the cityscape and will lessen our environmental footprint. But it will also incur very large costs to the city. Therefore, I would not recommend this method either. This alternative received 9 points. Relying on an outside company to provide transportation services to the public will also have a positive effect on the cityscape and our environmental impact. This method will also cost the city very little money. Therefore, I recommend that all cities look into partnering with existing companies to ensure that the integration of self-driving cars into our society does not hinder our progress, but rather facilitates it. Maybe go buy some rideshare stock. It might just pay for your kids' college tuition. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate your time. I will now answer any questions that you might have.